Hello, all. Good evening. Good evening to all of you. So, welcome to the fourth episode of Off-Roading with Women, hosted by Alap Concepts, and I'm very, very glad to be part of this and to be talking about what voices of different women mean to me, what is it to sing them, and what is it that I have gained in the company of all these voices of women. My name is Bindhumalini. I'm a singer-composer and looking forward to spending this next 20-25 minutes with all of you. அப்பா விடுதலை, அப்பா விடுதலை, அப்பா விடுதலை, களிப்பூட்டும் தலை நீக்கம், களிப்பூட்டும் தலை நீக்கம், அப்பா விடுதலை, அப்பா விடுதலை, களிப்பூட்டும் தலை நீக்கம், களிப்பூட்டும் தலை நீக்கம், கோணலான மூன்றிலிருந்து விடுதலை, கோணலான மூன்றிலிருந்து விடுதலை, உரல் உலக்கை கோன் கணவனிடமிருந்து விடுதலை, உரல் உலக்கை கோன் கணவனிடமிருந்து விடுதலை, விடுதலை, பிறவித்துயர் சாக்காட்டிலிருந்து தலை நீக்கம், பிறவித்துயர் சாக்காட்டிலிருந்து தலை நீக்கம், என்னை பின்னிழுத்தவற்றை வேசி எறிந்தாயிற்று. என்னை பின்னிழுத்தவற்றை வேசி எறிந்தாயிற்று. அப்பா 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 விடுதலை அப்பா விடுதலை. This is a poem from a collection called Teri Gatha, and this is a translation from Pali to Tamil done by Mangai Arasu. And the poet, the person who is expressing this, her name is Mudda or Mutta. Mutta by itself means to be freed. In Pali it goes like this: Sumutta sadhu muttamihi tihi kujjehi muttiya udukhalena musalena patina hujjakena cha muttami jati marana bhavaneti samuhatati. The translation says, the name I am called by means freed, Mutta, and I am quite free. Well, free from 3 crooked things: mortar, pestle, and husband with his own crooked thing. I am freed from birth and death. What leads to rebirth has been rooted out. So Teri Gatha is quite an important anthology. It's a collection of poems by nuns, Buddhist nuns, bhikkhunis, and this compilation has poems dating way back 2000 centuries ago, 2000 years ago. And this collection has spanned over 100 years, and they were not initially in Pali, they were all later written in Pali, documented. So this is the first documented anthology of women's voices. And what is so beautiful about the poems or these utterances by these bhikkhunis are that they are very brutally honest, very rooted, very grounded, and they speak about grief, desire, jealousy, everything in a very real way, and there is no denial of it, there is no escape. And even in this, the way she speaks about both freedom from rebirth, freedom from birth and death, the cycle of birth and death, and freedom from mortar and pestle and her husband, speaks about liberation at various levels for me. That liberation is not just one high-flown thing, but it's about every moment. And it also speaks about women quite trapped, as we all know, over years, both in the domestic space and in the public space. So this is something which speaks for both. And yeah, Akila, that sigh of relief really is, maybe liberation is, or the way Mutta says it for me is like, after a long tedious day's job, unrelentless and unrelenting, and you know, the whole cycle of just every day's traps, and you sit with aches and pains and say appa, like that. I've seen my party, I've seen amma, same thing, ural maavatradu, all this, these moments of trapping is also very real. So this liberation is also about that liberation in that moment, and to find liberation in these real objects, in your reality, is what is brilliant. And then from here, next is yeah. So these bhikkhunis, interestingly, I was reading about them and reading about Buddhism and how the whole time was. So there is also another beautiful but very, very heavy, intense grieving of a mother. I'm sure all of you know about the story of the mustard seed. Find that mustard seed from a house where there is no death. Similarly, there is Ubbiri. Ubbiri goes around lamenting for the loss of her daughter, Jiva. And Buddha says to her that you are lamenting for Jiva, but in that forest, in that grave, there are 84,000 Jivas burning or buried. Which Jiva are you crying for? காடுகளில் ஓலமிடும் உபிரே ஜீவா இந்த இடுகாட்டில் அத்தனை பேரும் ஜீவாதான் எந்த ஜீவாவுக்காய் அழுகிறாய் காடுகளில் ஓலமிடும் உபிரே. So one of the articles that I was reading says how these women first lost their men, their husbands, to war and all that was demanded from the society. And then they lost them to the sanghas, where the men converted themselves and became monks. So some of these nuns do talk about their desires, their physical desires, and that it is not easy to walk this path of letting go, of renouncing, and they are very real about it. So and apparently even Buddha was not very happy to give women, nuns, the same status as the monks for liberation. he could not acknowledge that it was possible for women, and it took a long time. And his own aunt stood for it, and she demanded it out of him in her deathbed, that do acknowledge that even women in their own right can get moksha or liberation or mukti. O Pandit, O resolute Pandit, who are you worshipping? Who are you worshipping, O resolute Pandit? The idol, the god that you are worshipping is made of stone, and so is the temple. Both are stone. So who are you worshipping, Pandit? Try to find God by unifying your mind and breath. Says Lalleshwari or Lalded from the 14th century. Here bono doshoe ek wat uza khaskarak hat wat uza khaskarak hat wat कर्मणस्तपवनस् संगठ कर्मणस्तपवनस् संगठ. This is very, very interesting lecture by CEC on YouTube. You can Google that, about Lalved. And it talks about how Lalved's Vak, these two lines which are complete in itself, and they are these powerhouses of truth and utterances, have been preserved and carried from the 14th century, the 1300s to now, through people remembering and relating to her stories. And the documentation of this comes much later, in the 17th and 18th century. So in this lecture they do raise the interesting question of how there is an absence of documentation of such a prominent voice, prominent person whose truth is still thriving and living in Kashmir even now. And it was documented through the oral tradition being spoken and then written down much later. And Laleshwari was critical of orthodoxy, of rituals, and she was a rationalist. And similar to Mutta and many other bhikkhunis, she walked out of her domestic life, which was very, very oppressive, and she had to let go of that and walk away. And she also walked naked eventually. And she is also hailed as both a Shaivite poet, but who was deeply influenced by Sufism. So she is an important figure in the history and in the language and literature of Kashmir, because her work was a mark of bhakti movement, because it was in the language of the common and it was accessible for everybody. And so Laleshwari is, unlike the Bhikkhunis or the Vachana Sharanes, anyway, a spiritual path. It's not just spiritual, it's about getting into understanding oneself. All of these poets walk the path of spiritualism also in trying to come to terms with themselves and their freedom, which was not available and accessible in the outer world, was in abundance inside, and that was what they could access. And Laleshwari is like a forerunner of Kabir by asking very boldly these questions of what are these rituals. And we find similar strong voices in the Vachana movement also. So coming from Kashmir, I will sing a Kannada song written by Bonta Devi from the Vachana movement, who interestingly is actually from Kashmir, and she came to Kalyan to settle down as part of the Vachana movement. And space inside the town, space outside the town. Is there such a thing? Is there such a thing as the Brahmin space inside the town and the Holaya space outside the town? Space is the same wherever you are. It is the wall of your body which names it inside and outside. He who answers your call anywhere is Bidadi. Bonta Devi is the daughter of a king of Mandavyapura in Kashmir. ಊರವೊಳಗಣ ಬಯಲು ಊರವೊಳಗಣ ಬಯಲು ಊರ ಹೊರಗಣ ಬಯಲೆಂದುಂಟೆ ಊರವೊಳಗಣ ಬಯಲು ಊರ ಹೊರಗಣ ಬಯಲೆಂದುಂಟೆ ಊರ ಒಳಗೆ ಬ್ರಾಹ್ಮಣ ಬಯಲು ಊರ ಹೊರಗೆ ಹೊಲೆ ಬಯಲೆಂದುಂಟೆ ಊರ ಒಳಗೆ ಬ್ರಾಹ್ಮಣ ಬಯಲು ಊರ ಹೊರಗೆ ಹೊಲೆ ಬಯಲೆಂದುಂಟೆ ಎಲ್ಲಿ 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 ನೋಡಿದಡೆ ಬಯಲ ಒಂದೇದ ಎಲ್ಲಿ ನೋಡಿದೆಡೆ ಬಯಲ ಒಂದೇದ ಭಿತ್ತಿಯಿಂದ ಒಳ ಹೊರಗೆಂಬ ನಾಮವೈಸೆ ಭಿತ್ತಿಯಿಂದ ಒಳ ಹೊರಗೆಂಬ ನಾಮವೈಸೆ ಎಲ್ಲಿ ನೋಡಿದಡೆ ಕರೆದಡೆ ಎಂಬಾತನೇ ಬಿಡಾಡಿ 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 So, this is another very bold question, and it is completely aligned with the Vachana movement, where it was to raise collectively above any sort of discrimination, be it caste, class, gender. And that's what Bonta Devi openly speaks. And Anubhava Mantapa is a space where Sharanas and Sharanes could go and speak their mind out. Similar to her, there is Ammuge Raima. Ammuge Raima says, do you need a pole when you're leaping to the sky? Do you need the earth when you're walking above the ground? Do you need the nod of the vane when you know yourself? Do you need a woman when you are a recluse? O Sharana, who knows Ammugeshwara Linga? Do you need to worry about lowly worldlings who flaunt saffron? ಆಕಾಶಕ್ಕೆ ಹಾರುವಂಗೆ ದೋಟಿಯ ಕೋಲ ಹಂಗೆ ತಕಯ್ಯ ಹಂಗೆ ತಕಯ್ಯ ಹಂಗೆ ತಕಯ್ಯ ಆಕಾಶಕ್ಕೆ ಹಾರುವಂಗೆ ದೋಟಿಯ ಕೋಲ ಹಂಗೆ ತಕಯ್ಯ ಹಂಗೆ ತಕಯ್ಯ ಹಂಗೆ ತಕಯ್ಯ ಭೂಮಿಯ ಸೋಂಕದೆ ಭೂಮಿಯ ಸೋಂಕದೆ ನಡೆಯುವಂಗೆ ಭೂಮಿಯ ಹಂಗೆ ತಕಯ್ಯ ಹಂಗೆ ತಕಯ್ಯ ಹಂಗೆ ತಕಯ್ಯ ಆಕಾಶಕ್ಕೆ ಹಾರುವಂಗೆ ದೋಟಿಯ ಕೋಲ ಹಂಗೆ ತಕಯ್ಯ ಹಂಗೆ ತಕಯ್ಯ ಹಂಗೆ ತಕಯ್ಯ ಆಕಾಶಕ್ಕೆ ತನ್ನ ತಾನರಿಯವಂಗೆ ಭಿನ್ನನಿಗಳ ಮಾತೆ ತಕಯ್ಯ ಮಾತೆ ತಕಯ್ಯ ತನ್ನ ತಾನರಿಯವಂಗೆ ಭಿನ್ನಣಿಗಳ ಮಾತೆ ತಕಯ್ಯ ಮಾತೆ ತಕಯ್ಯ ಅಗಮ್ಯವಾಗಿ ಚರಿಸುವಂಗ ಅಂಗಣೆಯರ ಹಂಗೆ ತಕಯ್ಯ ಹಂಗೆ ತಕಯ್ಯ ಅಮ್ಮುಗೇಶ್ವರ 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 ಲಿಂಗವನರಿದ ಶರಣಂಗೆ ಕಾವಿ ಕಾಸಾಂಬರವ ಹೊದ್ದು ತಿರುಗುವ ಕರ್ಮಿಗಳ ಹಂಗೆ ತಕಯ್ಯ ಹಂಗೆ ತಕಯ್ಯ Okay, so I think I've come to the end of my time. Thank you so much, Akila. Thank you, Alap, for this really amazing initiative. I can't wait to have more and more such conversations and discoveries, and finding voices, more and more deep and strong voices of women. I hope you all enjoyed this. Thank you once again, and please tune in again tomorrow at 9 p.m. for the next episode. Thank you.